Hi guys, we're here to analyze several different point of views from both the conservative and liberal side of linkage institutions and their positions on immigration.
So basically, a linkage institution is an organization that connects the people to the government.
There are several different types of linkage institutions, including interest groups, media, elections, and political parties.
These types of organizations provide a common ground for American citizens to maintain communication with the government.
My name is Cecilia, and I'm going to be talking about the interest groups on immigration, like their point of view on immigration. And the interest group that I'm doing is the NCLR, which is the National Council of La Raza, and I'm going to be talking about the mayor that they interviewed, like his point of view on immigration. And he is a Republican, but usually Republicans are like not for immigration, but this Republican, he is for immigration. But he talks about how he thinks that his workers should have better jobs and get paid better, and how he thinks that the economy will like benefit from immigration reform because the bridge also thinks that the administrative relief is good for his workers because his workers, the people who live in his town don't want to work because they're like afraid of getting deported. So he thinks that if the immigration reform would be passed, then the people won't be afraid to work anymore, which would be good for him and his town because he'll have them like working where he's okay. Listening, y'all.
Hi, we're going to be analyzing several conservative point of views on the linkage institution, Fox News, and how they portray information with the California Congressman Brian Bilberry. I had the opportunity to analyze Fox News where they were having an interview with a Republican Congressman, Brian Bilberry, and their point of view on the new immigration laws that, quote-unquote, reward those who make it across the border. Evidence to support this is that Fox News has always presented one-sided information, making this a very biased source, or a conservative source in general, because they've stacked polls where they only present one-sided information, where one side has a clear majority but does not state where or how they got the information. The point of view seems to revolve around the idea that Obama or Washington has made terrible decisions based on a poll that the new immigration laws has encouraged immigrants to illegally cross the borders in order to become citizens. With laws such as that, those who are currently in the United States will not get deported but instead turned into citizens. And they will increase border patrol to prevent others from walking into the United States. He talks in a narrow-minded way where he seems to mock Washington and says in a way that Washington likes to talk the talk but does not walk the walk. This source exhibits a bias because they show statistics of polls that are taken, either one of them was taken in Arizona and another one wasn't even stated, but each one seemed to have a conservative point of view where each law is saying that those laws being implemented in that current state would not be in favor of it, or saying that because of the new laws being created, it encourages immigrants to illegally cross borders to become citizens here. However, each poll seems to be just missing out information of who they actually take the poll from. For example, the first poll never states where they got it, which is crucial information because each state has a different point of view, with either they are Republican, Democrat, Green Party, or any of one of those or more. Also, in the second one where they give polls given from Arizona, it's been historically known that Arizona is a very conservative state where, in all, Fox News shows a clear bias towards a Republican point of view where it takes advantage of leaving out small details in order to present heavily one-sided perspectives and information.
So the linkage institution that I will be talking about today are political parties. And political parties are basically just a collection of people who generally have the same ideologies and they hold party conventions that nominate candidates who will run for office in Congress and also for the presidential election. And there are two main political parties. We know the Democrats and the Republicans. And despite their opposing viewpoints, they're pretty moderate. They have pretty moderate viewpoints. And the Democrats swing towards the left side of the spectrum, and the Republicans are more generally on the right side of the political spectrum. So I had the opportunity to analyze a response by Congresswoman Lee and her point of view and arguments over Republican anti-immigration legislation. And so Congresswoman Lee is a Democratic congresswoman. She represents the California's 13th district in the House of Representatives. And she's seen throughout the source because she has a very pro-immigration viewpoint, and she disagrees with the legislation passed by Republicans in Congress. The source is directly quoted as Congresswoman Lee's statement on Republican anti-immigration measures. And it explains why Lee basically disagrees with the Republican legislation passed on the House floor. She believes that the voices of the immigrant children are not being heard, and so she uses biased word choice and selective statistics, which are both strategies that she chooses, to help explain her argument against the opposing party, which are the Republicans. So the point of view of Republicans is not represented in this source, which makes me believe that it contains biases and the point of view of Lee alone. It's mostly opinion-based, but it also proves that biases are clearly exhibited. There's a lack of sufficient evidence and context for this passage. So now that we know that the point of view of the source is biased, we can critique the argument of Congresswoman Lee by analyzing specific parts of the text and examine if they're truthful, based on facts, or justified. So first off, Congresswoman Lee uses a brief testimony from some of the immigrant stories she heard to develop her argument. She uses the testimony as evidence for her argument, which is not reliable because she uses the few stories that she heard as an overgeneralization for all immigrants' journeys. And we can confirm that testimonies were presented to Congress, but Lee lacks the detail to explain what those testimonies entailed other than descriptions of the harrowing journeys. In addition, the few testimonies that Lee heard on the House floor are not sufficient evidence to generalize the entire journey of every single immigrant child who came to America. So obviously the stories that she heard were only few of many, but it's unfair to judge every single immigrant child, assuming that their journey was identical and similarly troubled. In the source, Congresswoman Lee additionally quotes a statistic that may be inconsistent with the context of the anti-immigration law that was being passed by Congress. Congresswoman Lee quotes the statistic that 60% of the children qualify for international protection. And it's an unclear statistic because Lee does not clarify the children who are qualified, nor does she clarify what type of international protection they qualify for. After doing a little bit of research on the background behind the statistic, I can conclude that the statistic is somewhat true. According to the National Immigrant Justice Center and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, 60% of immigrant children that come to America are considered refugees because many of them have experienced community, domestic, and gender violence and are seeking a better life. But only these children who can prove that they have experienced trauma are the ones that have the opportunity to stay in America legally, unless taken to a relocation center that will eventually deport the children. And in addition, according to the Traffic Victims Protection and Reauthorization Act in 2008, the government is allowed to provide critical protections for immigrant children and child refugees by requiring unaccompanied children to be placed in removal proceedings for an immigration court. So it's described as difficult and often complicated, but it's a required part of the procedure that protects the right of refugees and gives them the opportunity to stay in America. So although she doesn't go into the details about how difficult this process is for a refugee to receive appropriate protection from the government, it is a statistically accurate fact. In addition, Congresswoman Lee compares the testimonies of the children to the words inscribed on the Statue of Liberty and America's history as a refuge for millions. The words inscribed on the Statue of Liberty are, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breath free, the wretched refuse on your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me, I lift my lamp beside the golden door. So those are the words directly stated from the Statue of Liberty that are kind of like a symbol for American society, but so she uses these words as kind of like her ethos and logos to appeal to her audience, but she doesn't go into the detail about the testimonies of the children and their stories. The meaning behind the words inscribed on the Statue of Liberty relates to the argument that she has, but she should clarify that the words of the Statue of Liberty alone appeal to those children who are refugees rather than all immigrant children coming to America. So America's history is technically a refuge for millions, considering a majority of America's foundation was built on immigration and coming from other places to start a better life. So she uses this heartfelt comparison. It's technically correct, and her reasoning is justifiable. However, Congresswoman Lee does not mention the fact that Republicans passed this legislature specifically to protect the border security. It's not really clear nor fair that the Republicans, because she doesn't address their full counter-argument. The voices of Republicans who passed this legislation are not present, so it kind of creates an unbalanced and unreliable aspect to the text. And then she also quotes, "While border security is important, this bill further militarizes the border. This is unacceptable." She says this is unacceptable. And she also states that this bill does not address the root causes that contribute to the children being forced to flee violence and abuse. So the author, she doesn't provide enough her analysis with enough relevant evidence supporting her claims. She refutes the potential counter-argument by the Republicans by addressing that they may believe border security is important, but she further argues that the bill further militarizes the border. However, she does not explain why further militarizing the border is unacceptable, and she does not address the root causes that contribute to these children being forced to flee from violence and abuse. But she continues criticizing the bill for not addressing these issues. So one last part of her argument that is that's not reliable is by saying that immigrants deserve these rights and Republicans do not sympathize with the immigrants, she has a logical fallacy in her argument, which is called a hasty generalization. So making a generalization that all immigrants have made harrowing journeys to get to America would be quite an overstatement, because we can't guarantee that every immigrant has traveled great distances to get where they are today. Generalizations that all Republicans are not considerate of the testimonies of these immigrants is not fair, because the vote is the majority, and not just voting for legislation does not mean that they weren't affected by the story and it didn't touch those who were voting for the immigration legislation. So by analyzing the source, you can make your own decision about how you want to follow linkage institutions. There's almost always biases in linkage institutions, so make sure to recognize them when you see them and make your own judgment calls about American government. So in conclusion, the points of view from these linkage institutions can be revealed after taking apart certain claims, evidence, and analysis of sources to recognize obvious biases.
The more liberal points of view lean towards pro-immigration, whereas conservatives look for legal documented processes rather than free will going over the border.
We hope you use this information to develop and formulate your own political beliefs.
Bye!